Hello, friends. Am I recording? Did I actually hit record? Yes. Okay. Sorry. Hello, friends. My name is Amy Stone. I'm the creator of the Art of Imperfect Adulting. In January 2025, I launched this show and it was a new show, zero audience. I had a plan I thought was solid. Um, I had some advice from industry experts and I had a dream. Right. So I'm here to talk about what I did this year, what worked and what didn't, and share with you some of these things. Honestly, most people may not care, but I'm going to go through it anyway. I'll talk about why. So I'm not a celebrity. I've never been on a reality TV show. I'm not young. I'm not a social media influencer. I'm an indie creator. I launched this show. I kept a journal of everything I did along the way. And there's a shorter version of this that I'm doing at a conference, but this is my end of year full recap for you guys. And it's not intended to be a highlight reel. It's actually just intended to be like a statement of this and really honestly about what happened and what I did. If you are an indie creator, if you're somebody out there that's creating YouTube videos, writing books, newsletter, blogging, any of those things, I think that you might find some of this interesting because I think that all of those types of creation are similar. And that's that. So, why would I do this? I have had a wild year. It has been a lot of fun in a lot of ways. I'm wrapping up my year. I'm getting ready to make some changes to make next year better and different. And for some reason, I have a stack of episodes that need to be edited and things I need to do. And I have not been able to get past putting this together. Spent all day yesterday actually recording this and then got up, listened to a wrap up from somebody else and was like, oh, okay, let's do it again. So I need to finish this, get it done. It's going to be a little bit imperfect, a little bit messy. It's going to be very long. Who is ever going to watch it? I don't know. I'm going to do it. I'm going to post it, and then I'm going to move on. A theme of my year a theme of my year has been discovering that two things that what worked for me in 2015, 2016 is not working today. And also that there's very little support for people who are creating independently. And I'm going to whine about that as we go. So let's do it. Let's go. Let's do it. So I mentioned that I had a plan. Um, I did. And I planned my little heart out. I wrote it all down. I did research. I hired coaches. I validated the idea by having 100 conversations with people, which was very, very helpful. So what I was doing when I started in 2024, I had an existing coaching business. I offered one-on-one coaching for adults and blended families. They paid me for that. And this podcast, the idea for this podcast grew out of that business because I wanted to do a broad-based thing that applied to a lot of adults and a lot of different situations. And I thought that part of that would be a very wide funnel that would trickle down into my existing business. Those listeners would want more. They might not be ready for one-on-one coaching, but I launched at the same time a group membership. And this is a very classic funnel. It's a content marketing funnel. It's also sometimes is called a brand. It is a form of a branded podcast, right? The purpose of the podcast, I thought, was going to be to support my business. And you can actually hear that in the beginning and the closing of every single episode that came out this year. Come join me in the village, so on and so forth. I started the year with three coaches. One was focused on memberships and ads. Evelyn Weiss is her name. One was a podcast specific coach whose name is Joanne. And one was a talk show coach because I saw this format as being a cross between an interview show and I would love to be able to set and have in-person interviews. So I hired them for that. I also am big into the industry, learning about an industry that I'm in, and I love it. I'm very curious about media industry and journalism and entertainment overall. So I was deep into the weeds for podcasts and YouTube channels and newsletters for that. And that got bigger through the year because things weren't happening the way I thought. And so I leaned more into that. But I had a plan. And I had a concept that the plan was going to work because I had done this before. I had a podcast in 2016 that launched, that became a top 3% podcast. It's actually still listed as a top 3% podcast on Listen Notes, which I don't understand because it has been inactive since 2020. And that's one of the things that I always think about. I'm like, how could this be right? How could this data be true? But I did think I have a plan. I launched that show in 2016 with no plan and no knowledge and had decent success right off the bat. I got sponsors very quickly, all kind of things like that. And so one of the things going through my head this year was like, well, what if I really worked at it? Like, what if I really applied myself? Can I imagine the greatness I would achieve? And I also had a dream. I'm happy to admit that, right? Some people are not comfortable sharing their dreams. And I don't think you need to lead by telling the word, hey, I'm going to do this. But I do think with creative projects, having a dream is helpful because it's what you're working towards. If it works out, it's great. Coaches and leadership, they sometimes will call this visualization or a big audacious goal. I did have a dream. I had a dream of this show catching on and becoming very popular and very successful, and me being very happy with that. And so let's see what happened. Let's talk about that. Wrong laptop. Okay, push the wrong button. There we are. Reality check. Okay, so I started with the idea for the Art of Imperfect Adulting in 2024, actually. So I was having conversations, validating it, doing all of those things, and then started releasing the episodes in the middle of January. So the show itself can actually be seen to be maybe mildly successful by an indie show standard. It's considered top 5% globally according to Listen Notes. I really don't think that means very much. And when I say that, sometimes other indie shows are like, oh my gosh, they just want to be on the list and get to 10%. The top shows are like 0.01%, so 5%. So I'm very proud of what I accomplished. 7,000 audio downloads, we crossed that. More than 66,000 views on YouTube, 7,000 views very quickly on TikTok. I don't have any idea whether that matters. 178 episodes were released. That's an enormous number of episodes. I thought I'd do 50 for perspective. And I have received, this is the big one, 1,200, more than 1,200 people have filled out a form to be a guest on the show. There's been some stuff that has gone along with that. One person, I wrote them today. She submitted it twice. I was like, hey, you and I have already done this. You submitted twice, and she laughed. And the other thing that happened is that I was filling out interview questions. I was like, I feel like I've had this conversation, and I had. So you've done a lot of interviews if you can't even keep them track of them in 1 year. But here's the reality check. The business model that I thought I was building failed completely. Not at all any success. What's more, so not only did what I thought was going to happen by adding this show, I launched the membership, that didn't work. It didn't add to the coaching clients. In fact, the things that used to bring me coaching clients, that has not worked at all either. Like, so this has been, for revenue, this has been a real gut check of a year. So where the revenue was coming in before, that dried up, and the new revenue sources did not show up the way I thought it was. Another thing that I'm going to get out of the way right at the beginning is that I started this year telling people, I was like, yeah, there's probably never a time when I won't coach adults and blended families. I just couldn't see a time when I wouldn't do that, but that is no longer true. I am sundowning all of those things. I always said, I was like, it'd be great if people didn't need me for this. And in a lot of ways, I think that that's true. People are asking the questions that they used to ask me one-on-one, probably to chat, and chat is giving them good support. And it's a wonderful thing that if you don't have to pay somebody hundreds and hundreds of dollars to advise you for something, instead you can ask somebody and get good support. And I think that that's okay. I'm not, it is what it is. I don't think as many coaches are talking about this publicly as they maybe could. There's still lots of coaches making lots of money. And maybe it's a cop out. Maybe what I am saying here is not actually the reason that it dried up. I don't know. So I realized very quickly that what I had experienced in 2016 was not replicating in 2025. So, in my experience, in my opinion, there are two schools of thought in the business entrepreneurial space. One is research as much as you can before you create and release. Try and get it right before you do it. And the other is to launch early, fail fast, build the plane while you're flying. I actually think that both of these work. And I think that the best combination is probably a mix of those things. Nobody wants to spend 24 months and hundreds of thousands of dollars building something that they find out that nobody wants, or they get passed by somebody else who releases it first, or any of those things. On the other hand, my experience is that you can test and test and test and research and research and research, and that may not show up in what actually happens when you put your product out into the world. So, like, I think it's important to publish, to release, to iterate, to make changes, to get it out in front of people, start trying to gain momentum so that you can see how people respond to it. The original concept I had was I was going to reach out to my network, invite people onto the show, do 50 episodes this year, and build this membership community that supported my coaching. And instead of that, I have ended up with 178 published releases, more than 1,200 pitches to be on the show, which is super fun. And those guests came from the out there. They were not from my personal network. They were not necessarily people I knew. In fact, it's pretty late in the year where people from my network start showing up as guests on the show. And so that's a really, really interesting thing. Why would I do this? Why would I change that so dramatically? The short answer is that I was truthfully leaning into the momentum that showed up, which I think is a skill, right? I won't say whether or not it was a smart idea to do what I did. I don't have positive revenue receipts to say, yay, I'm right, everybody should do what I did. I got this flood of interest, and I thought, you know what? What if we see what happens? What if we follow this momentum and see what happens? I did also have, and I've talked about this all year long, anytime anybody asks me, there was a random piece of information that was, and I don't even remember where it came from, that the data after you release 100 episodes becomes more helpful for the creator in analyzing the show. I think that's been true. The more data you have, the more information you have to go on about what's going on. So let me tell you what happened more in detail so you can see. I started with really zero, right? So I rebranded an Instagram account that I was already using that had 300 followers that were not doing anything. So, call it zero. I opened a new Facebook account to do this. I had a LinkedIn account that I opened in 2016 that I didn't do anything with. And I'm not going to pretend that I know how to use LinkedIn now, even, but I have posted many of the episodes this year on LinkedIn. I'll tell you why. I opened a TikTok account in, I think, July. And so that has been that. I had an email list. This number is not right. So I had an email list that had it had 1,500 people. I cleared it out. It was about 500 when in January. It went up to 1,500, and then I switched hosts, and I'm now right around 1,700, 2,000 total, but split over two email providers, which is dumb and I shouldn't be doing. But this is a brand new show. There were no listeners. I did have my own personal network, of course. And so that's where I started. The costs, it costs money. Let me make sure I'm sticking to the script. I did not make a profit in 2025 from this show or the coaching business. In fact, this was my lowest revenue ever, and I'll be honest about that. It takes time and money to produce content. And my expenses for the producing of the show, the raw production of the show, are about $6,000 right now. In theory, just like you used to be able to kind of blog for free, you can microblog on social media for free. In theory, you can start and release an audio podcast for free, right? You are still going to take the time to do it. I do not think that you can build an audience for free. Most people who you see grow a rapid audience, they have some place that they're moving that audience from. And that's how it grows so fast. And so you see this when somebody leaves a profession. So a person who is a teacher who goes into business selling products to teachers, they can take their professional network and it becomes their entrepreneurial prospect pool. In the creator space, in the talent space, when you see somebody who looks like they appeared out of nowhere, often there's a backstory where they did have access to a different audience. So I'm going to use Mel Robbins as an example because she is one of the most visible women creators in the audio podcast space. It's like she came out of nowhere, sort of, but I don't have the exact details on this, and if I get it wrong, I apologize. I think she was a corporate speaker who had a professional network that was pretty significant. I think she had a professional network because I believe she went to law school and maybe worked as a lawyer. So I think she had enough of an audience and enough of a professional network and reputation that she was able to get a book deal, a traditional book deal, and a TEDx talk. And then she launched the podcast. So it seems like she appeared out of nowhere with nothing, but she may have had a little bit more than we see, right? And so that's one of the things to keep in mind when we see people do that. What did the revenue look like for me this year? It's painful to talk about the fact that there was so little revenue for me because I like making money in business. I think business is fun when it's working um, and succeeding. This is my lowest revenue in 7 years of business. And I lost money this year. So at this point, I cannot even really call this a business if you're looking at revenue. It's an expensive and time consuming hobby. And I don't like saying that out loud. It's not what I want to build. But I do think this is an important conversation to have. I think it's more important that people honestly admit that stuff up front and not rep like as if they are having success where they're not. Um, I have a couple. So I said this was an important conversation to have. Let me just back up there and click on it a little more. There's an industry podcast hosted by a woman named Norma called Podbiz. She asks every single guest, where is the money in podcasting? I think this is an excellent question. She does a lot of talking to industry insiders and people who work for companies and brands, ad agencies, people who work for Podmatch. These are insiders, right? And I think that the answers you get when you talk to companies like that are very different, maybe, than if you were talking to individual onesie twosies people who are making podcasts, right? And I think that's an important reflection. But from my perspective, I have a couple things to say about this, right? I don't think that podcasting is actually an industry, right? That's a spicy thing to say that's going to piss people off, but it's too small and too unclear and too narrow. It's also very decentralized, very fractured. It's not clear what we mean when we say podcasting. It's very, very nebulous and weird. So anyway, I think it's confusing to pick that as a word. And also, I think the actual industry is media and entertainment. And then you've got portions of that, but then you've got journalism and you've got entertainment and you've got film and you've got TV, you've got audio, you've got user created indie stuff on YouTube and other audio, other video platforms. You've got all of that thing, and it leaves you. It's a bigger pool to be in, and I think that's the industry. Does that matter? I don't know. But the answer, when you look at media and entertainment as an industry about where the money is always in the audience, right? And so you can call that listeners, you can call it viewers, you can look at ticket sales, right? You can call them subscribers, members. It's all it's all there. It's all the same thing. The money comes from the audience. What I thought, when I realized that what I thought was going to happen this year wasn't happening, I did lean heavily into trying to listen a lot and learn and watch and study what was going on in the industry overall. There are two ways that media companies monetize, generally speaking. This is a super broad oversimplification, reductionist statement. It's flawed in many ways, but it's also, I think, an easy way to classify the things. You are either going to sell something directly to your audience, like tickets and popcorn, or you're going to sell, or like you could also sell services, plumbing, software, coaching, right? That's selling directly to the audience. Or you sell exposure to your audience, which is what we're doing when we sell ads and sponsorships. One of the things that's really interesting, and there's another hot take I have that I'll just throw out there. At one time this year, I heard somebody say that podcasters are very much influencers. And the person who was on the other side of the interview was incensed by this statement. I actually think that it's something to really think about. And when you think about the changing landscape of media, talent, and all of those things, I think that there's nuance here. But I think that if you are using specifically host-read ads hard baked into your content, audio or video, that is a form of influencing. You are using your personal reputation and the product you create to generate revenue for yourself or someone else, and it's very much like that. Like so, it's not the same as doing a makeup tutorial on TikTok, but it's something to think about. Um, when it comes to traditional advertising and sponsorship, there is a giant gap between a show like mine and the viewership and audience that I have, and what it takes to be able to monetize either through YouTube or a traditional network ad deal. Okay. So if you're going to sign on with an agency and they're going to take you for ads, the one of the starting points that I learned this year is about 5,000 downloads per episode. So, and I'm a top 5% podcast, and I have 7,000 downloads for the year. So that's a huge gap. Okay. Video monetization on YouTube is monetized through AdSense, which is a not it's wonderful and it's one of the easiest ways to do it. But the gap there is also big. It requires 500 subscribers, and 3,000 hours of watch time and 3 million views. Believe it or not, that's probably easier for most people to hit than 5,000 audio downloads for an audio podcast, but it is an enormous gap. And this matters to me in regards to what I think is going on in the industry, what happened to me, and what I think is helpful for other people, because I think that we are dramatically missing support for the growth of indie creators, right? So people talk a lot about burnout and pod fade, but what I think is missing is tools that help people make it worthwhile and workable at these beginning stages, right? So let's talk about it. So I've been upfront and humble pie and all those things about the fact that it was an investment year. It didn't do what I thought it was. Was it worth it? I don't know. I don't know. Honestly, I'm going to punt on this question, which is a crappy thing to do. I had a wonderful amount of time. I loved all of the conversations I had. I loved putting the pieces together. I loved learning new things, trying new stuff. I did not at all have the experience and success that I thought I would this year building it. I built something else kind of by accident almost or incidentally. And I have experienced a ton of what am I doing? What the fuck kind of moments. But I don't have a good answer for this, right? So I'm going to punt this and ask you to come back and ask me in a few months or a year, if anybody actually ever watches this. All right, so let's talk about. I told you I hired people. I told you I researched. I told you that I had a plan, and I followed the plan at the beginning, and then threw the plan somewhat out the window. Um, this is a lot of the advice on this slide that I got from podcast coaches, from listening to things about podcasts. I tried a lot of these things. I spent money on these things, and I'm not angry or bitter about any of it, even though I would say that most of it didn't really have the impact that I thought it would. I think that I wouldn't have known what was going to work or what was working for me until I tried these things. And I think that you need some momentum before you can have enough data to see what's working. And so you have to sort of get it going. It takes a while to do that. So some of these things I have thoughts on, and others I think you just really have to try, right? There's a period of any new business where you really are in a season of try anything, say yes to as much as you can, and then steer the ship from there. So let's move on. So those are the things. If you go to any community of creators, so influencers, YouTubers, and podcasters, you will see that they're all asking, how do I grow? How do I grow? How do I grow? One of the things I did this year was hire coaches to start. I fired almost everybody, which is not this is not a dramatic moment, but I let them go in February, not because they weren't good, just because what they were saying I was going to experience wasn't showing up in what I was doing, and I wanted to lean into what was actually happening and focus on that, right? And not pay them for if I wasn't showing up and applying their information. I spent a lot of time learning about trying to find out what was going on and learning about the new media industry. Sometimes we call this new media, this whole thing. And one of the things that I found, it didn't actually surprise me, but it is still true. It is tough to figure out who knows what is going on and who you can trust for information. And equally important in this is that, and I was just thinking about this morning, like everybody's doing their wrap ups for the year in the industry. And so last week I listened to a podcast and there are these 20, it was everybody they interviewed in the year, 26 people giving their forecast on the year, but they're all industry people. They're in the industry. And so if you ask them if they think next year is going to be good, what are they going to say? No, no, it's like not good. It's just random. Anyway, but the information that's available for creators is heavily slanted and heavily weighted for the people who are insiders, industry insiders, and vendors for the industry. And you get a different story and you get different advice if you're talking to the guy that runs a hosting platform, an ad agency, a data service, a microphone company, a directory, a newsletter company, an event company, all relying on that. You're going to get a different story from all of those people than if you talk to individual creators. And I do think that we have a bit of a mismatch at the moment, right? Which is just to be aware of, right? 99% of the information that I found about the industry of podcasting and how to build a podcasting this year is geared towards what are called branded podcasts. I think that that is not a problem necessarily because I think the majority of podcasts right now are branded podcasts. That's why people are launching them. So, it's on brand. But if you don't have that, if you're building a narrative podcast or if you're building a news podcast, that information is not going to be a match. An uncomfortable truth that is true in a lot of industries, not just podcasting, is that a lot of people who will offer to give you advice and expertise are not actually as honest or as knowledgeable as you might wish there were. True story. A couple of weeks ago, I was on LinkedIn and because I post for the episodes, I don't spend a lot of time scrolling in LinkedIn, but I did see somebody say, and they were like, I am so excited to say that I have 100,000 downloads on my brand new show. And I was like, wow, that is super impressive. And I had not heard of this person or what they did. And then I went and checked the few directories that I know of, and it didn't even like come up. It was like not even like on at all there. And I was like, that is really weird. And then they pulled it down very quickly. And I don't know this person or anything about them, but there's a chance that this just wasn't true. So I don't know why anybody would do that, but people are not always honest. One of the things that people teach and offer as a technique for growing podcasts, audio podcasts, is what they call podcast SEO, which is writing your titles and your descriptions to attract people who are searching for stuff inside the podcast player. Instinctually, I don't think that people do that, with the notable exception of podcasters who are in the industry who might be doing it. So podcasts about podcasts for podcasters. Maybe those people are doing it. But I don't think that people are going in and searching in their podcast apps for like dogs or butterflies or golden doodles. I just don't. And that was my instinct, which has been confirmed by every analytical piece of information I've seen this year, shows that podcasts are discovered mostly by people who are referred by other people. So, like, I tell you about an episode or you hear about my guest and you are invited to listen to the show. And so that's an example of a disconnect. And that jibes with what I have seen this year in the response from my show. The thing that people are searching for that is driving traffic to my website and to the links appears to be the name of the show, right? Not keywords. Right. So that's just what I think. And this disconnect between the information that is provided by the experts that you can hire and the real experience of creating is something that I'm continuing to harp on. Earlier this year, before an interview, I was doing the pre-recording chat with somebody, and this woman said to me, she said, the internet listens to the first 15 seconds of your audio podcast, and that's what creates the metadata. And this person was my guest, so I did not correct them or further this conversation, but I'm pretty sure that the surprise about what she said played in the closed captions across my face is my understanding of the internet is that the internet does not have eyes or ears. And in fact, that audio is basically invisible, right? To things that are crawling on the internet. You have to put a transcript, you have to update the schema, you have to put in the metadata. And so I was surprised that she would say that, but whatever, right? I realized in the first quarter that my sales model, my revenue model was not working exactly the way I wanted it to. My growth model was happening a little differently than I thought it was. One of the parts of my plan was that every single episode of this show, all 170, has a thematic, keyword rich article that is written on the theme or content of that interview that posts on the website, the WordPress site. And that was designed to catch SEO traffic that would then lead people back to the audio program and the membership and all of those things. But it's a slow process. SEO is a slow process. It takes time to get that engine running. At 6 months in, though, I realized that what had worked for me for all these years wasn't working the same way. It was, I mean, zero query SEO traffic coming in based on those. And so I leaned in to figuring out what had happened. And you may have heard that the internet is functioning a little differently than it did. And everybody has theories, dead internet, all of these things. But I did try and learn some things about it, about SEO, the new GEO, AEO, which is the chat models and that traffic, whatever we're calling it this week. And I applied some things to that starting about September. Basically, this was adding full transcripts to my website and manually updating the articles to include better schema information about the audio podcast and the video, right? It was an almost instant uptick in my traffic to my website and discovery. The numbers are still very small because I just started this. I'm recording this in December and that was September, but it was almost immediate, the improvement, which what I take away from that you may or may not is that at this moment, schema for websites is pretty significantly important, especially podcasts. And the other thing is that building on somebody else's platform, when we're talking about a podcast or a newsletter, if it's hosted somewhere else, that's building authority for somebody else. It's not building authority that lives on your domain. That is still, I think, pretty important. Could be wrong. All right. But that's the discovery problem. Audio is invisible, continues to be invisible. Everybody says that email is very important. I agree. I believe it. Build your email list. Critical. Email is a better tool for selling sponsorships and ads, in my opinion, because it's easier to track. It's easier to respond. I don't know that anybody in the history of podcast listening has ever clicked on a link in a show note. I really don't. I really don't. But they do click on ads and links in email. But getting people to jump from one platform to another is really hard. Getting people who listen to an audio show to jump to subscribe to your email list has been harder than, it's just hard. It's really, really hard. I have a theory that I just think that people who are listening to podcasts and books, they like to listen. And that's their experience. The people who are on social media for entertainment, they like to do that. YouTube viewers are there. The platforms are sticky. But so these come together for a creator in an integrated omnimedia business, but it's not necessarily a funnel that one leads to the other. And it's not necessarily easy to get people to move from one to the other. I also think that people are smart. And in 2026, I think you have to have an amazing incentive to get people to join your email list. For me, this year I started with an offer that was like a Serenity quiz that responded pretty well to a social media ad. But the bigger offer has been come be a guest on my show, and people opt in happily for that. They're very happy to do that. They enjoy it. And so that was a great, pretty good discovery for me. The take home here, though, in a big way, is that I think that for new creators, these are each like a suite of touch points where you are meeting your prospective audience. And it includes a lot of things, including email, audio, video, and social media. And that's my segue into talking about social media. I totally thought that social media was going to drive traffic to my audio and my video. It's a little confusing, the whole, like, is YouTube a social media platform? Is it a distribution channel? Is it a search engine? It's all of those things, right? It's confusing. The advice that I got before I started, which I've heard for at least a decade, is choose one platform and stick to it. I think that's actually very bad advice in 2026. I'm not going to say that what I'm going to suggest is easy. In fact, I think it's a massive hurdle that really is an obstacle for many, many people and will prevent them from growth. But I truly, truly think that when you are building a new audience, you have to be in as many places as you can to figure out where your audience actually is. I think that if you know that your audience is on one of those platforms and you can guarantee it, the choose one platform might work. But listen, I'm 52. I started this year, my favorite platform was Facebook. It's not anymore because Facebook kind of sucks at the moment, but it was. And if I had leaned heavily into Facebook as being the only place I was, I would have missed out because that is not at all where my growth came from this year. And I think that audience behavior and research actually does support my opinion that people are loyal to individual platforms. So if you pick one and you say you're going all in on Instagram, you are limiting yourself to the people that are there. And they are not necessarily the same people that would be on another platform like LinkedIn or TikTok. So what happened, my actual story is that right off the bat, my guests were saying, and I have a worksheet, right, that people fill in, and where I asked for Instagram, they would put a LinkedIn link. And so they wanted to collaborate with me on LinkedIn. And I was like, I don't really get LinkedIn. But instead of being stubborn, I spent some time making a plan, not maybe a great plan, and I was like, "Fine, let's collaborate on LinkedIn." My other option would have been to be stubborn and be like, "I'm not on LinkedIn. I don't like it. I'm not doing it." Right? And LinkedIn has been one of my biggest growth spaces. Is that because I had such little presence on LinkedIn? Maybe. Maybe it's because it's a great place to collaborate. You can decide. All right. So if you were to go in and talk to the very friendly people in the podcasting group in Reddit and ask them what works for growth, they're going to tell you that you should already be famous. It's actually not bad advice. Um, so my biggest growth this year, hold on, let me see what the next slide is. No, there is another slide coming up where I'll show you the actual data for all of the platforms and you'll see how I grew. LinkedIn and YouTube were the fastest growth places for the show. And YouTube was unexpected. LinkedIn was even more unexpected. The biggest surprise overall was the growth of my guest network, which I figured was going to be like 100, turned out to be 1,200. Releasing 175 episodes instead of 50, that was totally surprising. One of the things that worked for me, none of those were like the most thing. One of the things that really truly did work for me was that I submitted my trailer to a pod news show that is just dedicated for trailers. And that was a great thing. Everybody should do that. I had a couple of earned media things, some PR that worked too. So my show was always designed to be an interview-based show. The expert advice that I got at the beginning of the year suggested that I go with Podmatch and Matchmaker FM for finding guests. Matchmaker FM, I didn't even get a start on. It just didn't. It was like too cumbersome. I didn't. It didn't work out. I paid for Podmatch. It wasn't a perfect fit for me, which doesn't mean that it won't work for you. Um, Alex Sanfilippo is the person who runs Podmatch, and he's ubiquitous and everywhere in the podcast industry. He's a very hardworking person, and but he does run that as a black box system. There's no way to know who's actually inside that community. My guess is that most of the people in that community are people who want to be on shows, which you would think would be a good fit for me. But I also think that it's probably about 80% business podcasts, people who want to talk about business. And I share personal stories. And it wasn't a great fit. I would guess also, if I had to make a wild guess, I think that the majority of people on that platform are men. I have no way of actually knowing, but that's the way it is. What did work very well for me is a company called Podcast Guest Directory. They have a service where they'll email out to their list that you have a guesting opportunity. I've done it twice this year. It's been a really, really good thing. I also did some online communities that are specific for speakers looking for exposure and guesting opportunities. Those are very good. I used Help a Reporter Out, Source Our Sources, and Quoted. Those also all worked. So these were all the places that I posted my guest opportunity, and people responded, and it was great. Um, Guest relationships are a joint venture collaboration opportunity. You want the guests to help you promote the show, and you could talk to 110,000 podcast hosts. You will hear a refrain that the guests don't promote as much as people would want them to. This is a reality of this experience. It doesn't bother me at all. My mindset and my attitude going into this is that I tried to design my framework to be as easy for the guests to promote as they could, and do as much of the work for them with a smile so that I got the gain wherever it showed up. And has worked very, very well for me. There is a change in this year, where Instagram and YouTube are creating collaborator invitations so you can invite to collaborate. This is an amazing change. It's really, really good. I'm going to talk about that everywhere. I did not assume that I knew what would resonate with my audience. I released these episodes. They're very varied in their topics. I trusted that the patterns would become clear over the year, and they sort of have. I have had a great response from my guests who are collaborating, and when they don't do it, I don't get upset. I don't do other things with them anymore, but I don't get upset. Oh, here it is. Here is the what we see as actual results. Okay, so this is my YouTube summary at the beginning of December. 66,000 views, 612 hours. That is mind blowing. Okay, these are my audio downloads from Captivate FM. So these are audio downloads according to whatever the rules are about that. That we crossed 7,000 at the beginning of December, audio downloads. I'm very proud of it, but it's still not very much. These are my social media screens. So this is Instagram, which had 42,000 views. This is Facebook, which has 38,000 views. See, it's slow. This is TikTok, which I only opened in like July, 7,000 views, but only, it's like 30 followers or something, really sad. And this is my LinkedIn content performance. Look at how steady that is. That is like super, that is like right up. Super, super interesting. Okay. Um, and this is where it goes. I think so. I mentioned this earlier. There has been this huge discussion this year that I think is wrapping up, but everybody was talking about was, is video necessary for podcasters? It is my opinion, as somebody who's sort of been in this, that it's not actually about video or audio, but it is about, remember I talked about how audio is invisible for search. YouTube is a discovery platform. It is a search platform. It is creator first. And so it's not necessarily about the video, even though YouTube is made for video. So it should be video on there. Like posting audio on there seems like a weird thing to do. But what it is it's a place to be discovered. And that should not be ignored. I don't think it can be ignored. Like, I hope that there will be consolidation and people will fix the whole search for audio kind of thing. But in the meantime, a YouTube all the way, babe. Okay. When I first started writing this, which was in September, I was really leaning into the idea that we were inside a big media shift. I do think that's true. The first clue for me was when Podcast Movement merged or bought Sound Judgment, the newsletter. I was like, whoa. Then Amazon, which had purchased Wondery shortly after the lockdown, did a restructuring of their podcast unit within Wondery. So, quick summary on that, right? Think what you will about Amazon as a company, but this was a unique situation where Amazon had, I think, all of the information for the entire process: what it cost to produce the shows, what everybody was getting paid, what the ad revenue was bringing in, the listenership and viewership, and all of those pieces for a significant amount of time. And they have a reputation of making consistently savvy, good decisions as a business. So what they did, and the vice president who was in charge of it did a couple of interviews, and he was just, open about it. He's like, listen, the only shows that are worth paying high quality production for a unit like Wondery on for advertising revenue are shows that have celebrity hosts with huge audiences. And they then took everything else that was in that book and spun it off into Audible as bonus content. It's not worth it to even try and generate ad revenue from those. And I paid a lot of attention. Okay, I paid a lot of attention for that because I'm not a celebrity. I don't have that huge audience. And so I was like, wow, okay, that is really interesting. The next thing that I read was a piece of data from Nielsen, which is an analytics company, who showed that streaming and OTT video consumption was more popular by consumers than broadcast and cable combined. That's a bombshell. And I spent a couple days picking that apart. And we're currently in the whole Netflix, Warner Brothers, YouTube, and the Oscars things where streaming companies are buying traditional media outlets, which is the world is upside down. The pie is flipped, right? So I do think that I think that for indie creators, we're in a really, really interesting place because there's nothing in the way of you making your own show and putting it out there. You could go out there and film a feature film and place it into the Amazon video catalog. That's possible. I'm not going to do that because I don't know how to do that, but it is possible. Anybody can submit content on YouTube. It's not necessarily the best thing that everybody can do, but it is a new game. It is an entirely new game. And I don't even think that it's not that the old rules don't apply. I think that it's the wild, wild west. And you really do yourself a favor to think about it as like, this is something new. It's something different. Where do I fit and what do I think is possible, instead of trying to apply old rules from 2015 or 1980 or whatever, maybe even 2020, definitely 2021, when it was like the bubble of the pandemic. All of this is true, right? Audio is not going anywhere. People still listen to AM radio. People still use ham radios as a hobby. The old stuff doesn't disappear. But when you're talking about doing something new and joining into a growth space, I think you want to ask yourself, like, where is the growth opportunity here? I don't know that it's going to be RSS audio, which doesn't mean I'm moving away from that. I'm not, but I don't know that I would pick it as the growth opportunity of 2026. As indie podcasters, we are a target market for the vendors in this space. This is one of my spiciest opinions I share, but the vendors who are selling us stuff, from coaches to microphones to guesting services to trade shows, those folks make money whether we succeed or not. And the only reason this matters is that it is a really good idea to be careful to vet these people as well as you can, and to think about yourself to yourself, is it what I want to do, right? I'm not saying coaches are bad or products are bad or anything, and I know several people who spent six figures building studios in their house for hobbies because they want to and they can, and it's fine, it's great, I fully support it. But caveat emptor, like, why? What does this do for me, and is this person somebody I can trust? In my opinion, The only thing that matters in the media business is the audience. Literally the only thing. And it's not the tech, it's not the AI tool, it's not the branding, it's not the tagline, it's not your avatar, it's not the who hosts your newsletter, it's not how pretty your funnel looks and how well it does. It's the audience. That's the thing that matters. This is especially important for new people who are just getting started, I think, because it is when you're not making any money yet, when you're investing in this and it's an expensive hobby, then the metric has to be on your mind all the time: audience size, audience engagement, sales. It has to be where your focus is. And the only way that I have seen to grow an audience for an indie creator who does not transport another audience with them is to collaborate and partner with other people who have audiences of a variety of sizes. This can be done in two ways, right? Advertising. Some people think that advertising is icky. I've never fully understood the dislike of advertising, the obsession with organic. Maybe it's because I've been in the media space for such a long time. I'm just used to it. It's just buying access to a potential audience that you might not otherwise have. If you want people to come to a garage sale, you can open your garage and put stuff out, and people might wander by. If you put a sign out a couple days before, you might get a higher turnout. If you place an ad in a local newspaper or online directory, you might get more people. If you do a full advertising campaign with radio coverage and billboards in your town, you're going to get more people. So it's just a different way of doing it. And Google, I mean, and organic stuff is more manpower, and the rules, it's harder to do sometimes. So the tool that I leaned in heavily this year, they did a little bit of advertising. I sponsored, put an ad in some newsletters, which did not work at all for me. I did some Facebook advertising, which did work but didn't convert, and so I stopped. But collaborating with my guests, that's the tool that I leaned into. And I talked earlier about how my mindset is that I try and make it as fun and easy for my guests to promote their episode as possible with an incentive. But my mindset is that I don't rely on them for that. I don't think that when Oprah had Tom Cruise on her show back in the 90s, that she thought that Tom Cruise was going to go home and his agent was going to email all of their fans, right? His job was to come and be on the show. It was Harpo's job to promote the episode. So that's just my mindset for it. If I was building train tracks, I would have to source steel. If I'm building an interview show, the guests are the material for the show. Hopefully that makes sense. Um, so the invitation to collaborate on Instagram and on YouTube is a massive improvement. Back in the old days, you would be able to tag people on social media platforms and their audience would see it. That was problematic because they didn't have to consent. And so people who were strangers would tag you in things, and it was a little creepy. But this requires the guest to actually accept it. And then it's easy for the guest and it works for both people. It's native on the host. It's a couple extra steps. You have to build it in, but I think it's a wonderful, wonderful enhancement. But the audience is the only thing that matters. Um, I think that there is a truth here that people who are giving advice in the expert room, it might be that nobody really knows what's working for indie creators, partially because the focus is so exclusively on the top 10, top 100 shows. And the advice pool is heavily rooted in these vendor companies and the people who are working on the institutional side of the business, and their experience is different from an indie creator. So that's my own thing that's there. When this year, one of the things I've discovered for myself is that the infrastructure for indie creators, people who are creating on YouTube, making podcasts, writing newsletters, it barely exists. I feel like I've just been banging my head against a wall. Like, where are the groups? Where are the tools? Where is the education? Where is the support? I joined a group in January that today I consider to basically be a scam. It's not actually a scam, but it's just like, I joined for a Facebook group and a community. They're just like a ghost town. And of all of the things that I've joined this year, three of them are like that. So they'll take your money and tell you how great they are. But then when you get inside, it's like, there's no there there. There's no there there, including one that considers itself to be like the benchmark association. Can't sell any of it. It's a small community. So I can't throw these people publicly under a bus because I make myself a target. But I think this is a huge deal. I can't say how big I think this is. I think indie creators need groups and associations to support each other, help them grow. And I'm going to talk more about that as I go. But I think that the shift in how work is being done in 2025 means that this is something that is needed across a variety of industries, right? And so more people are in the gig economy, which is very similar to in the freelance space we've got, or in the creator space we've got it freelancing back in the day. So we need associations and peer groups and networks for workers who are not connected through a common employer. The word that comes up when people start to talk about this is union, and union sometimes has a negative association. Sometimes they're great. I don't have any, like, I'm not a trades expert, but what I'm actually talking about are voluntary associations, things that you join in for professional development, education for advancement, opportunities for collaboration and cooperative type opportunities. Um, and so I think that there's a huge gap. I think we don't have these. There are some small groups that are organized by, faith groups. They're like Facebook groups and small associations. There are some coaches who put together, groups where everybody's following their methodology. That's not really what I'm talking about. Like, so I think it will work itself out. I tend to think that this is the way it is. We're seeing consolidation and people talk about the industry growing up. I just want to say that in my experience with this, change rarely comes from people who are at the top of an industry that have been there for a while because they benefit from the status quo, right? They benefit from the current system. But change tends to come from people who are outside of the system and they are working to build new things. And I might say this, it might come up, I might have it because this is one of my things. Hundreds of thousands of people have been laid off in the past 2 years. Some of those people are going home and they are going to create cool new things. And some of those people are going to lean into the creative space and they're going to launch podcasts and YouTube channels, and it is going to be a thing. We're going to see this. All right, so I'm going to talk about one of the ways that I see a problem in the creator space and search and discovery. I've been talking about this for a couple months. I've shared it with probably 20 people. I call it my phone book theory. When I was a kid, every house had a phone book. Every corner had a phone kiosk, phone booth with a phone booth. They came out every year. They were republished every year. There was a white section, or white pages. In New York, it was a whole book. You had the white pages and you had the yellow pages. So one was individuals and one was businesses, right? So if you needed to find somebody, you would look them up in the phone book. If you needed to find a business, you would look them up in the yellow pages. On the flip side, if you were opening a business and you wanted to be found, you knew to call and get your business listed in the yellow pages. And every year it would be reissued, right? I cannot imagine how much work that is, by the way. I'm just going to say that. So, with the advent of the fabulous World Wide Web and the internet, search engines, and I'll use Google as an example, but it's more than Google, but we'll use Google as an example. They replaced the phone books in a really, really successful way. You no longer needed to pull out the book. You could search online, but those of us who lived through this remember that the way Google built those business directories was boots on the ground. There was an army of people making phone calls to businesses in every town, going door to door, updating the information from the directory, talking to the people, finding out about their services, offering them free one-page websites on Google and business directories, and a little bit of ad revenue. So they front-loaded this with data entry, right? It didn't magically appear. Same thing with Amazon. Like the history of Amazon, it was not on day one this like magically successful independent marketplace. The history of Amazon is that they, for a short period of time, they were actually buying inventory. So it was like a pre-stage where they bought inventory and sold it before they convinced people to be the marketplace. It took time and it took some effort before the flywheel supported itself, right? So Google and Amazon rewrote the book on these things. Today, search is not working the way it used to. I don't know if you've noticed this. It's a whole thing that people are talking about. Some people call it dead internet theory, all of these things. But if you don't get your search terms exactly right in a search engine, you can sometimes get squirrely results. I will get results for restaurants that are in a different town. And you will get things that just don't match. It's very strange what is happening right now. I am very sure the brainiacs that are in charge of search are going to resolve that. But at the moment, it's not working as well. With regards to with regards to directories and things like that for podcasts and creators, what I'm saying is that there's no phone book right now. There's no directory. There are lists and directories and libraries of shows, but there's a limitation there because those are sort of they're different. They're each fractured upon different players and in different places. You have to be in that app to search for them, and there's a limitation about the information, right? So like associations might have a directory, they keep it behind the paywall, it's invisible, right? You do that because it's privacy. This is a catch 22. You do want to keep your information private, but it is very, very hard to find accurate information in 2025, 2026. It is very, very hard for creators to find each other, right? It's like this, like you're just, isolated, right? And so I think that this lack of a phone book, lack of an existing directory is a really, really critical problem on a bunch of different things. I think it shows up in a bunch of different ways. I talked earlier about, and I actually heard this on a recap episode today for the first time, and I was really impressed that the person said it. It's like, one spot, which is, maintaining and making the directory. I'll give you a couple examples of problems with this with regard to creators. Um, uh, there are like 4 million shows, but only 200,000 of them are active. Why do we even have that other number? Why are we not keeping track of who's active and who's not? I don't even know, right? So there's no, and YouTube has like a gazillion people, right? It's a gazillion people. It's very hard to tell who's behind the YouTube accounts, and that's an issue. Here's why it matters to indie creators. I talked earlier about the fact that there's a gap that creators have to get to. They have to cross that threshold before they qualify to work with like an ad agency that's going to rep them, or if for influencers, an agent that's gonna work with them. There's another one on the other side for advertisers and companies, right? If you listen to podcasts, there's like 25 brands that advertise on every single show. It's all the same. It's all the same. It's really monotonous. It's like crazy. But I think that that might mean that there's an equivalent threshold problem for companies. So you've got to be willing to buy in on like a nationwide, global, long-term big investment for advertising, or they don't want to talk to you. So you've got both sides of this problem at the same time. Meanwhile, you have all these creators with small and moderate sized audiences who would love to have advertising, and you have medium and small businesses that are would love to be matched with clients. And it really seems to me that there should be better ways to bring these together. One of the things with regards specifically to the phone book theory is we have directories of shows. And if you think of the platform themselves for influencers, as a library, you sort of have that, except the search in there maybe doesn't work. Like, is YouTube a directory? Yes and no. What we don't have is directories of creators. Like, if you want to go find who is making YouTube videos and podcasts in Miami, which is where I live, that's a harder question to answer. If you want to say, hey, how many women are hosting audio podcasts? Good question. Good question. We don't know. Or I don't know. Maybe somebody knows. Um, when I was working on the outline for this, my writing partner, Claudette, wanted me to do a section that was like what I would do differently if I started over tomorrow. I think it's a terrible question. I'm not really going to answer it. But on the other hand, every day is a new day. So it's really like what I'm focusing on moving forward. YouTube. I think is a growth platform because it's creator space, creator first space. It continues to be. Their business model is entirely based on people creating and putting content on there. And so they natively and intuitively, it is always in their best interest to allow for discovery and growth for the creators because that's how it's built. It is the only example of a platform like that. The other place you sometimes see that are in new social platforms. There's this like initial wave where they help creators grow, but once a platform is gentrified, I don't think it really works. The other thing that I am like working on moving forward, and I'll talk more about this in a bit. I don't think that a single show like mine actually counts as a business. And so putting myself back in the spot of thinking of myself as a startup and not as talent or as a solopreneur is my mindset moving forward. If this is going to be business, if it's going to drive revenue, if it's going to be successful, what does it need to look like? That's my mindset for 2026. Ah, I'm going to tell you the truth. Like I had all this stuff written out for this, like what's actually working and stuff like that. Today in my actual mind, it's like, is anything working? I do think, here's what I think. I think that modern media requires multiple revenue streams, not one very linear funnel. Affiliate sales, sponsorships, premium content, consulting, product events, you need all of it. I think that modern media audiences expect a connection and interaction with the talent. I think that that is means that that I think that that's important, right? An example of that interaction with the talent. Stranger Things, super popular streaming show on I think Netflix, maybe wrong. They are launching their finale in theaters. And you might think, well, why would people want to go? It's a chance for fans to share that really special moment. And people love that. People love that. And so if you're an introvert, if you're a person who got into podcasting because you're an introvert, um, it's harder to do that, right? So that is that. So this is my focus 2026, moving forward, still experimenting. Check in with me in a couple of years, see if it worked. The patterns I see and that I talked about in this very disjointed, very confusing, not at all well organized, rambling webinar, I think they extend beyond media and podcasting. I think that what we see in a lot of ways is a gap between old legacy expert frameworks, expectations that old systems will continue to work the way they had worked, and the lived reality that things are different right now. It's a gap between who's in charge and the people who are working. It's the fracture between experiences, between generations. I have a freshman in college this year. Last year, when we were going to admission tours, one of the reps at a school said that they expected the people who were college freshmen this year, 2025, 26, to have between 20 and 30 jobs in their lifetime. And my husband, who is at the tail end of the boomer generation, he's in what they sometimes call Generation Jones. He just disregarded it. He just was like, that's not true. At the same time, I think I already recording. Anyway, one of my early guests on this show who's in the podcasting space, when I was doing the research for his interview, I looked at his LinkedIn. He's in his 30s. He's already got like 15 jobs. And this is not a person who appears to be, bad at his job. He appears quite honestly to be beloved. And people speak very highly of him. It's just the nature of his work experience, a year or two here and then on to the next opportunity. That's the reality. And that gap between what people think at different times based on where they are, I think that is the pressure that we're seeing. It can be very hard in a variety of situations to trust what you are experiencing and to believe what you see. It's that old thing about the emperor has no clothes, right? We want to believe that the emperor is wearing clothes if everybody around us says that they are. We want our partners to be good people in relationships, and it's hard to allow ourselves to see when that's not working out. It's hard to stop doing things like we lean into comfort and what we're doing instead of shifting. But if the emperor has no clothes, he has no clothes. And so allowing yourself to see what's actually happening is important. And this year, I allowed myself to see that what I thought was going to happen didn't happen. And I'm coming forward to you to show what did happen my year and the gaps because I think it's important. I started the year saying I was launching a podcast. Now my focus is on building a media company and I call it a show. I do get major imposter syndrome when I say that whole media company thing out loud because it is still just me in my little bubble here doing all of the work, but that is my focus. My point is media industry experts, thought leaders, whatever that means today, they may still be giving 2015 advice. YouTube coaches doing whatever they do, that I think they show up in my inbox offering to show me my vidIQ screen as if I don't see it every time I post anyway. But they might be giving advice that maybe doesn't work either, right? If you ask YouTube if the vidIQ stuff works, YouTube tells you no. Casey Neistat, who was one of the OGs on YouTube. Love him, still watch. The last thing I watched of him was absolutely a brand partnership where he was like leaning heavily into repping the companies he's investing in and wearables and things like that. And, I still watch. I still watch. He openly says, he's like, I don't think that work for him will work again. And, that's it. People who launched virtual only things in the aftermath of the pandemic, that's an example of a cycle that I think might actually be complete. There are pieces of that that will continue forward forever, but they had tremendous success doing things like virtual only networking and virtual only summits. And I think that the success of those, people are still offering to teach how to do that, but are they still the best thing to do? You have to decide, right? So in 2026, what I'm doing is trying to pay very close attention to where I find the actual momentum and the current opportunity for growth. I think the only way forward is to actually do the work ourselves, to try a lot of things and to follow the evidence that is you're actually seeing and be willing to turn away from thought leaders if what they offer you doesn't match what you're seeing in front of your nose. I'm going to talk about things that I see missing. I talked about the directory with the phone book. It's a big thing. I think that there is a massive gap in the indie creator space, specifically when it comes to female and women creators. Not because it's not happening to male creators, but because that's the group that I'm a part of. I just want to be perfectly honest, right? That's the group that I represent and that I fit into, right? There's no, the old model was that you would get a job, you would practice your craft, you would build your network, and then at the end of your career, you would launch into the freelance consultant space with all of that in. That is no longer the way the world works. People are launching out of college into freelance jobs from the beginning, or they go to work for a couple of years and then they're laid off and then they're in the freelance space. And there is not enough support or any support in these indie creator spaces showing what is the success ladder. How do you build like a transparent, open community that's not aligned with somebody, selling you a coaching program at the top? Place where you can safely talk about what's working without, being bombarded with sales pitches from vendors in the industry. And for specifically when it comes to women and other marginalized groups, we still get devalued inside the media entertainment landscape from men who are still predominantly in charge. Last week, a couple of weeks ago, I watched a webinar and it was hosted by a congenial silver haired man who is well respected in the industry. And I felt like the whole second half of it was mansplaining what my experience was supposed to be as a woman. And I got a major ick from it. And I'm also pretty sure that he has no idea that that would be the way I would feel. He would not understand. He would be maybe even hurt if he found out that that was how I feel. Most importantly, where I am with this, it's not my job to, or even a thing I could do to go out and change that, right? It's not my job to point it out to him or try and change what people are doing. But on the other hand, it might actually be my job or my role to do my part in trying to build a better mousetrap for the system that I'm in. Um, Years ago, I had a boss in a startup who, when you came to him, if you pointed out a problem without a solution, he would remind you that it's not really helpful to just talk about the problem. So he would encourage you to always come in with a solution, even if it was a wild card. Um, and that's not perfect advice that works all of the time. But I do feel like a lot of what I see from thought leaders and experts in media and talking heads and people who are willing to expound on what other people should do, they are very heavily rooted in the just we're going to talk about the problem and agitate the problem. "Ah, get off my yard, right? You may or may not know this about me. I've actually been a freelance creator since I was in like middle school. My dad was a freelance creator, and I sold my first photo to a stock agency when I was 13, I think. So, the model that I described to you earlier about like get the job, work on your craft, and then go into the freelance space, into the consultant space, that was the model that I came of age from high school and college, but it didn't work for me even when I graduated in 1996. True story, my first copywriting class in the journalism school, the dean who taught the class talked about typesetters as being in a protected industry that was not ever going to go away, that was not prone to economic corrections or global conflicts or any of those things. He just said they will always be around history the rest of time. And in his defense, they had existed since the invention of the printing press. So I can see why he thought that. But also within 2.5 years from when I took that class, when I graduated, typesetters were being laid off by the thousands because every press was going digital. And it was a complete and total market shift. So there were less jobs. There were not as many jobs in journalism. I thought I was going to be a newspaper photographer for anybody who's curious. And there were jobs in 91 when I entered J school. And when I graduated in 95, 96, there were a lot less jobs. And so I worked for a very short amount of time as a freelancer. And then I took my skills into the corporate world because I wanted to be able to pay my, phone bill and my rent and my grocery bill all in the same month. In some ways, I never looked back, but in other ways, I have applied those skills that I learned in journalism school as a creative, growing up as a creative, and then working for a company in every single day of my life. One of the things I did, so after I left corporate, I started a photo studio for about 8 years. And one of the very first things I did is I rejoined an organization that was called the Professional Photographers Association. And I did that mostly because they offered me a form of liability insurance that you really couldn't get outside of the association. But there were lots of things that were very helpful. If you wanted to find um, album producers, they advertised in the publications that they sent out. There were conferences, there were local events, there were all kinds of resources. It was very, 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 very helpful. It was a trade association. There were peer-to-peer connections. I made good friends, right? While we're on this topic about peer-to-peer and professional advancement, I want to just also throw this thing out here because I'm talking about women creators, women indie creators. The historic schedule for like professional development doesn't work for a large group of women because of the fact that some of us, I don't know what the percentage is, but we have this time period where we're doing the work of, keeping the human race going. And that has a biological time frame that overlaps with the professional development time frame, right? So if you're supposed to be building your professional career when you're in your 20s and 30s, and that's also the time that you're supposed to be building a family, those two things are tough to do at the same time. Anybody who tells you differently, not not agreeing with Amy, right? I talked to a woman just last week and she was saying that, women at age 50, they have reached the top of their career, and that stung because I'm 52 and I'm trying to do something new. And I feel like I did take a gap and really work on my family for that time. And I do hope that I didn't miss my window. So am I deluding myself? Maybe, but that's where I am. even today, people are out there selling that old idea that the way you do this is, go to work, build your framework, and so on and so forth. But it's really outside of a couple of professions, law, medicine, accounting, engineering. I don't know that that's the way it's working for a lot of people. Another thing that is the reality of the situation that we're in, I'm 52. There were people that are in leadership of organizations, companies, governments, all of those things that have been there since I was 18. That's a strange thing, right? You'd think that there would be change of control, right? Eventually there will be, right? Um, if you have a model where people are self-employed creators from day one or shortly after a layoff, there's a gap that we need groups, associations, and organizations that are helping us develop our craft, connect with tools, develop a network among other independent creators, and bring it all together. That is how I think we grow this industry in terms of elevating content, elevating the quality of product that people are producing, and creating a scaffolding and a ladder where people can learn to succeed. Um, Another thing that's true is that we are in a global economy. And I'm not the person to talk about this in terms of expertise. We're also in a global media environment. When I was in college and I lived abroad in Europe, I did not have access to US news outside of the International Herald Tribune and CNN International, right? Today, you can live anywhere in the world and get news and information beamed instantaneously in a bunch of different ways. There are still some blocks for that, um, borders that extend, but they only sort of work. People are doing workarounds, and I really think we're in a transition point there. I don't know what all this means, but I do kind of feel like there's a tsunami of change coming with this. Like, why would the deal for Netflix in the UK, why would the shows be offered different there than they are in the United States? If I go from my house in the United States to France, why can't I take my services with me? What role does that border have in a true global economy and modern world? I really don't know, but I think that those are interesting questions. One of the people that I have trusted and respected more and more as this year goes on is somebody who speaks about the media and podcast industry who lives on the other side of the globe from me. Does that make any sense? James Quinlan? I don't know. Maybe. Yes, he's a smart guy. So I did mention that I spent a lot of this year wishing and hoping for a community to show up that would be this for me. And I have joined several communities, I think about 10 this year. It's one of my largest line item expenses. Some business communities, which have a small group of creators in them. The best business community that I've joined this year is a group called Entreprenista. Entreprenista League is what they do. Great group. Even though they're a media company, they actually don't have any real support for other media companies within them. It's not their job to do it, but it's something I have noticed. I'm in another group, very small group of podcasters organized by a woman named Becky Mollenkamp. She's fantastic. Truthfully, if her group was not just for audio first podcasters, if it was for creators, and if it was about 100 times the size that it is, I would not even consider trying to build my own group. But I'm looking for a sizable group that is not tied to a singular distribution platform. The reason I think that is that I think that the present and the future is omni-channel. I think that as a creator, you have to be aware of the fact that you need to deliver your programming and your offerings in a lot of different formats all at once: video, audio, text, short form, media form, long form, where the audience is. And that's why I'm calling the work that I do for creators. The vocabulary sucks, and so we'll go there. I'm a woman, so I live every day hoping I don't get branded as a Karen or a Jessica. I do think that it's helpful for women to have spaces where they can do things with and for other women. This is not at all because I have anything against guys or even co ed groups. I do dream of a world where there are less requirements where you need a man to be in a spot to open a door of opportunity for women. And that's why there is a space for women to support other women. Specifically, media and entertainment is still an industry where the leadership is very, very homogenous and run by men. So much so that people still can seem kind of clueless that they're even doing it. They're so in the bubble that they don't even know that it's there. Early this year, the merger between Podcast Movement and Sounds Profitable, the newsletter, they announced their new media team. All men, not media team, leadership team, all men. And nothing wrong with that. I'm sure they're all great guys, but I just saw it and I was like, you didn't even notice when you were putting this whole media release together that, I mean, it's just really interesting. Just, I'm sure they're great guys. It's a solid publication, but it struck me. Opportunities for women sometimes come from other women, not always. USC Annenberg Graduate School did an analysis of shows hosted by men and shows hosted by women and the percentage of guests that were women and men. Shows hosted by men had predominantly male guests, but shows hosted by women did not have majority of women as guests. So it was a lose-lose for women as guests across the board. It's a small study. They did it by hand, I think, based on the top charts. So there's an enormous amount of data that was not considered, but as a data point, it's an interesting thing to think about. And so what I would love to see in the future is scaffolding and ladders and more groups of women creators that are networking, an association for support, peer-to-peer education, community growth opportunities, events, resources, tools, all of it. All of it. It's something that I have not found for myself. It's something that I desperately, desperately want. And it's enough that I've decided that I'm willing to do at least some of the work to try and build it. The moment I call this unmuted, that name could change, but stay tuned. If you've in this with me an hour and a half into this webinar, which I would predict that the grand total of people who are going to do that is going to be zero. But consider this your invitation. You are invited. Let's do final thoughts and predictions. I think the only path to audience growth and to building anything new is to build something that people actually want. And you won't know that until you put it in front of people and say, hey, do you want this? So you have to publish, you have to create and put it out there to see if it works. Usually that means shipping things before they're ready and then following the evidence that actually shows up. I do think that it's possible to build great things in 2026. In fact, I think that indie creators have more opportunity today than they ever have since probably the invention of the Gutenberg press. I think that the industry and the world is filled with doom and gloom. But when you are in the role and taking the job of creating new and exciting things, it's very important to study the past. It's important to honor the past and pay attention. It's critical to be aware of what the present situation is and pay close attention. But success, I think, comes when you keep your eyes on the future and moving towards the future. And so doom and gloom has very little space in my mind. I think that in 2026, some predictions, I think we're going to continue to see consolidation, specifically in the audio first space, because those are small companies. And the old players have been doing this stuff for a long time. And that's when consolidations happen. People are ready to make their exits. So I think we're going to see more and more consolidation and the beginnings of innovation that are going to come from unexpected spots. One of the huge things that I think we're going to see in the next couple of years, starting in 2026, is a push for tools that lead into transparency. And that, is it live or is it Memorex for people who are old, who remember the old Dolby Memorex push that it was like, it's just as good on the audio, on the cassette tape as it is live. No, it never was. But anyway, I do think that's going to become a bigger and bigger deal because it's harder to tell what's real and what's not in a lot of places. And so I think we'll see tools, strategies, ranking systems, evaluation systems, all of those things I think will begin to appear. I think that we are also going to see more and more synthetic talent And in a lot of places, it's not going to bother you. If somebody does, unless you're the voice of an animator, but if somebody creates an animated series and uses synthetic voices, I don't know if anybody's going to really care, except for the voice actors who would have liked to have had that job. And so this is a period of transition for that. And I think that it's going to be significant. Do we want to listen to an audiobook recorded by a synthetic voice? If it's good, I don't think people are going to complain, is the truth. And so the opportunities are going to come in different places. And I don't know what that's going to look like. I do think we're going to see a solution come in the next couple of years for the catastrophe that is audio data. I suspect that that's not going to be tied to the RSS delivery system. I could be totally wrong about this. I'm not the person who knows this, but it's my understanding that really, really our data problem is tied to the structure of that delivery system. So that's the reason I suspect that. I really, really think that we have to see some sort of standardization across platforms for creation. I just think that because the way right now it's banana cakes, it's like every single one has its own different set of rules and people are fractured all over the place. So I think we have to see that, but I don't have any idea what that'll look like. And I'm sure it'll be a giant pain as it happens. But like, I mean, for just think about the tiny little pain in the butt it is when platforms change the sizes of the images you want. So I had the graphics templates commissioned for the show because I'm not a designer. And then like almost immediately after I launched, Instagram changed the size for their feed. And I was like, oh, everything's wrong. It's totally sucked. Anyway, um, the big thing for me is community and network. And so that's where I'm leaning in, which I've said a bunch of times. That's why I'm leaning into it. I think that there's really big growth opportunities for people who are willing to do the work of organizing big communities where there's opportunity for people to grow within the communities. There's a lot of communities right now where the growth is really for the person who runs the community, but like opportunities for people to grow and connect for their own benefit within the community, I think there's tremendous growth there. I think they'll be really important. I do think that people are smart, and I think that the season of hacks is maybe not as much here anymore. People don't believe it. So that's my thing. So that's my year. That's my recap. Long, boring, um, wandering, rambling, self-serving. I've had a blast this year building what I've built, and I can't wait to see what I can do next year. This is Amy Stone from the Art of Imperfect Adulting, signing off. Thanks for watching.